we're going to revalue gold at $30,000. We're going to revalue Bitcoin at $1 million a coin. And, government will now exchange your dollars for either of those two things. Bring us $1 million, we'll give you a Bitcoin. Bring us your ounce of gold, we'll give you 25,000, or, give us 25,000, we'll give you an ounce of gold. And we are now on a sound money standard, period. And, 1971, gone, done. Oh, and by the way, we're going to balance the budget by, basically cutting expenses here and there. And we, the TGA would be revalued, and that markup of the TGA would be used to pay down the government debt. There is no crisis, and yet, they're trying to be preemptive. They know that if reserves get too tight, they'll have something like the repo blowout in 2019, and they can't have that, and they don't want to have that. They're trying to fight off a crisis by kind of gradually leaking more money in there.
Lepard acknowledges that the most likely path forward is high inflation that eventually tears the social fabric apart. But there is a 10% wildcard case that he calls the bold reset. Imagine waking up one morning to a presidential decree. In this scenario, the Trump administration and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent decide to skip the decade of pain and do something unprecedented. They revalue the Treasury's gold at $30,000 an ounce. They revalue Bitcoin at $1 million per coin. They announce that the government will now exchange dollars for these sound assets at those new rates. If you found value in this breakdown, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share it with other investors who are paying attention. We're here to keep bringing you sharp analysis and voices that understand what's unfolding. Thanks for watching.
This is no way to run a railroad. It's just no way to run a railroad. And, that's all pretty depressing, and it's tearing the country apart. And you see all the bad social things that are happening in, Minneapolis, everywhere. And, it all just comes back down to the money being broken, which again is why I wrote the book. I wish the country understood that, and I think most Bitcoiners understand it, that it's the base layer that's broken, and it's not unsolvable, folks. I mean, if we go back to a sound base layer, we've got all this great technology, and if we don't get into a world war and we don't all kill each other, everything will reorganize. Now, there will be winners and losers. People who hold debt will get wiped out, and there'll be a lot of inflation in the transition, but things will be good again. I mean, we are all productive actors who will, with the right incentives, do the right things and make the world a much better place. And so, all I'm waiting for is to get through this fourth turning and return to that sound money. The problem is that, it's probably going to take crisis or semi-crisis conditions to get us there, because, the average Bubis Americanus, and certainly all the politicians, aren't going to take us there on their own. Although one interesting possibility, and I've talked about this on other pods, is that Trump and or Bessent, do something really, really bold, which is to try and do a monetary reset. And I don't know if they have the political space. I don't know if they have the guts, but, we could theoretically skip the, let's go to super high inflation, the country tears itself apart and currency fails, by, Bessent waking up one morning and Trump saying, we're going to revalue gold at $30,000. We're going to revalue Bitcoin at $1 million a coin. And, government will now exchange your dollars for either of those two things. Bring us $1 million, we'll give you a Bitcoin. Bring us your ounce of gold, we'll give you 25,000, or, give us 25,000, we'll give you an ounce of gold. And we are now on a sound money standard, period. And, 1971, gone, done. Oh, and by the way, we're going to balance the budget by, basically cutting expenses here and there. And we, the TGA would be revalued, and that markup of the TGA would be used to pay down the government debt. I mean, if they did that, it would be enormously painful for bondholders. It would be enormously one-time inflationary, but it would, so it's like ripping off the Band-Aid. It would hurt like shit. But, on a go-forward basis, we would actually have a sound money solution. Now, that's my 10% case, because I don't know that they'll have the guts to do it. And I mean, and even I may be wrong about it. I mean, it's a scary step. I mean, I could be wrong about the way that it plays out. So, will they do it? I don't know. But I do know this. I do know that until we get back to sound money, I think inflation is going to be the problem of our age. And, the more likely path on the whole thing is I think inflation just gets worse and worse and worse. The blue team wins in 2028, and inflation really gets bad. Maybe the currency even fails with all their actions. And then, I've said this in other pods, I really do believe there's some chance that we get, Michael Saylor stands up and says, hey, you know what? I've studied history. I went to MIT. I'm an engineer. I understand how this all got broken. I've got the receipts. I'm the richest man in the world because Bitcoin's at $10 million a coin. I'm going to burn my keys. I don't give a shit about any of that. I want to be the Thomas Edison slash, Thomas Jefferson of our age, and, elect me as president. And we're going to reform the Constitution and reset this whole goddamn system. I mean, that's my hope for my kids, because, going the other direction, it could be decades of pain, trying all these other solutions that won't work.
To those worried that they are too late, Lepard is sanguine. He doesn't see this as a trade. He sees it as a multi-year trend. He admits there is a 30% chance of one more cleansing flush, a Bitcoin correction down to $50,000 or $60,000 before the big print arrives. But when that liquidity hits, he believes Bitcoin will wake up like the lion in the famous Christopher Walken monologue. It will respond ferociously, and if you aren't already positioned, you will miss the move. As Fred Krueger noted in Bitcoin 1 Million, if you missed the 10 best days of the last cycle, you made zero money. You don't trade these assets. You hold them until the system resets.
There is no crisis, and yet, they're trying to be preemptive. They know that if reserves get too tight, they'll have something like the repo blowout in 2019, and they can't have that, and they don't want to have that. They're trying to fight off a crisis by kind of gradually leaking more money in there. I think the problem they're going to have, though, is that the math is just compelling, and I think there are there are probably three macro signals that I see that say that they're really running out of time, and I'll point them out. Probably macro signal number one is the price of silver. Silver was up 157% last year, and just continues to go straight up. And there's a lot to unpack there, but we'll just leave it at that. The other point is the price of gold, which is very similar. It hasn't gone up as much, but it's up 50% plus last year. And then the third item is, and I kind of continually retweet this every morning, is the Japanese 10-year bond. Japan has been a source of a lot of the liquidity in the United States and really all over the world as a result of their carry trade, which was driven by their low interest rates. And interest rates in Japan kind of look like a chart of the price of silver. The 10-year just kind of goes, it's up and to the right in a very steep fashion. So to me, there's some clues, not certainties, but clues that things are breaking and they need to print more money. And as we see, they just started printing more money. So centrally, a lot of things are driving it. But I would say that the two biggest drivers are, the dollar losing its status as the world's reserve asset, not necessarily currency, but asset. People used to say, since 2014, net treasury bills held by foreigners have been flat to down. People just don't trust the dollar anymore. They can see what we all can see. So that's part of it. And then, the Chinese and others, they've stood up the Shanghai Gold Exchange, and the volumes there are huge. And, you've now got China trading with Saudi Arabia. And if Saudi Arabia ends up with too many yuan and they don't want it, they can't buy goods from China for it, they just convert it into gold. In the olden days, with the petrodollar, they would have converted that excess into US dollars. And so, so you've got nation states going for gold as a neutral reserve asset. That's part number one. You've also got central banks realizing the problem, and central bank purchases have been growing, and they're large and steadily growing. And you've got a third issue that it kind of falls into a little bit of the conspiracy theory world, but I would consider, we all know that a lot of conspiracy theories have kind of become conspiracy facts. And that is kind of the paper markets that have manipulated these things. The United States and others for years and years, and I know this, I believe this, there's absolutely conclusive evidence if you go to the GATA site or a lot of other places to show it, that they've suppressed the precious metals prices because they know that doing so helps their inflation numbers look better.
But once we return to a sound base layer, whether it's gold, Bitcoin, or a hybrid of both, the technology we've built will finally start working for us instead of against us. Everything will reorganize. The transition will be painful, and bondholders will be the losers. But the world on the other side will be a much better place. If you found value in this breakdown, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share it with other investors who are paying attention. We're here to keep bringing you sharp analysis and voices that understand what's unfolding. Thanks for watching.